So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Canada on FORTE podcast. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for today's podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to host you as well. I would like to ask the first question because you're a pianist and piano teacher. I just want to ask you an update on what's your status like during the COVID-19 pandemic. How has teaching been?
It's been it's been actually pretty good. I was worried about how it would all go because I do have like younger students that I teach, which online would be difficult, but it was very enlightening, continues to be very enlightening. Um, I feel kind of lucky that majority of my students were willing to like transfer onto the online platform. And it's been actually kind of fun learning new ways to teach and recognizing the methods that I use in person that translated really well online, and then also seeing my students' practice area was also very enlightening, just to like see how their posture is, because sometimes you're working on like their hand posture and everything you do doesn't work, and you realize your bench has been too low this entire time. No wonder. So yeah, that's been also, it's been enlightening, it's been fun. I feel very lucky.
So because in person they were coming to your home and you had, some stuff set up to your ways, but with the online calls you got to see how they were in their own environment and that enlightened you on how to fix them. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Was I know not a lot of people have technology, so transferring to online lessons are not as, let's say, convenient for others than for some. Were you kind of worried that not a lot of your students would be able to transfer?
I don't think so. I think if it wasn't for technology like Zoom, I would not be enjoying online teaching as much. But for me, I have my students try to be as like minimal and as easy and accessible for them. So if that means it's just like a phone on the side of your keyboard, I'll make do.
Right.
And then sometimes there are times where like they don't get their video working or whatever, and we just have like a call. Because
Hmm.
audio is the most important part, anyways, if you're teaching piano.
Right. Also, just an audio call, not a video call.
Yeah, sometimes or like the video will lag or there just don't have enough bandwidth. So
Mhm.
sometimes we'll just hop on to like a phone call, finish up the rest of the lesson.
Wow, as a last resort kind of thing. I see. That's interesting. I never actually heard of anyone do that before.
It happened in one of my lessons with an adult student. Like we tried different things. Both of our bandwidth in our area was just like not having it. So he's like, "Why don't we just have a call?" And I was like, "Cool." And it worked to my surprise. It worked out really well.
Right.
So it's like
How
maybe I don't need visual at all.
I mean, I can see that posing some challenges. How old was the student
Oh, he
for
was an
that
adult
call?
student, so that was definitely like
A lot
part of
easier.
what made it work.
Right, right. Can you imagine what it'd be like for a younger student?
I would just say, hey, I'm just gonna send you some videos to finish up the last lesson. I'll send you the links.
Right. Was there anything new that you learned about yourself, about your own teaching style from transitioning to online lessons?
I found that when I teach in person, or yeah, or in any way, I try to basically teach myself out of a student in the sense that I try to make them as independent as they can be, critically
Hmm.
think without me, all that stuff. So at the end of the day, that they're able to stand on their own. So that includes that when them in the lessons, there's a lot more exploration as opposed to me telling them what to do. A lot more questions. It's like, how does this feel? What do you notice? What if you did this? Or I give them prompt questions so that when they're practicing at home and I'm not there, the progress still gets made, especially for the younger
Yes.
ones. So
Yes.
I have found that the things that I have discovered that I do in person actually translated really well online too. So the difference between my in-person lessons and online lessons were not that great of a disparity.
Hmm. So it transitioned quite smoothly.
Yes.
Ah, I see. I see. Yeah, I learned that quite late too, actually. The independency and critical thinking. I still remember what my teacher said to me at the first month of studying, and I was 18 years old, I think. And the first month, he said to me, "My job here is to make myself redundant." And at the time, being quite naive and immature, I thought, well, isn't that doesn't that go against your job? You're you're being paid to come here and teach me. Why you make yourself redundant? And then it took me a while to figure out, it's he's trying to prepare me for the adult life, for the post graduation times when he won't be there all the time, and I need to have some good tools in my head to figure things out by myself. And it's good that you're teaching at such a young age this necessary skill.
Thank you.
And when did you yourself have this pivotal moment in your own sort of musical thinking and practical thinking?
I think I had heard that quote somewhere at some point in my life, in probably in my late teens. But I think what triggered most of what was already in me was I had a conductor who was also my teacher, and he had said to me, "Don't focus on your goals, although that's important. Focus and remember the process so that you're able to always get to that goal and also help others get to that goal."
Right.
And I think that was the first thing that kind of instilled the idea of like, you need to teach yourself out of a job, essentially, if you want to be a good teacher.
Right. Yeah.
You know, not necessarily that being the only thing that makes you a good teacher, but ultimately you want your students to be independent without you.
Yes.
That will happen one day.
Yeah. Do you sometimes wish that they would always come to you still after a couple of years since leaving you, that they
I think
want
like
to
they
come
can
to you for
drop by
advice?
and say hi.
Right.
Yeah, they can come back and have lessons and stuff, but I rather see them like grow and blossom and do their thing. If they come back after a time and there's for whatever reason, usually that sparks like there's a problem, like
Right.
beyond music stuff. And usually my lessons tend to be kind of like therapy sessions in a way. So if they come back, there's usually something happening in their life that they want to discuss with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a necessary thing as well for a teacher, to have that sort of therapy atmosphere for the student and not just focusing on whatever the teacher is teaching the subject?
I think it depends on the subject. For music, I find that there's a different level of bonding, I suppose you could say, than let's say math.
Okay.
Because you're dealing with art, you're dealing with emotions, and sometimes a student will come in and my goal is like, let's have a good lesson, let's learn, let's make progress, let's connect with the music, blah blah blah. But they have something they need to get off their chest before any of that can happen. Otherwise the whole lesson's a dud.
Right.
And your mental state and your emotional state is really important to learning in and of itself. So perhaps that's just the experience I've had with other teachers, that is something I consider and kind of bleeds through into my teaching as well.
Yeah. I can see, because maths is not based on emotions and expressions, but in a different way. It hasn't got anything to do with anything of human emotions. But with music, I see that. I mean, if the student's unhappy, you can't really carry on with the lesson anyway. So the therapy has to come in some form or another. You have to make sure that they're happy first before you can continue teaching them. If they're not happy, then you can't force them to play and to learn. You have to deal with that situation first. I mean, I've had this few students who are like that too. It's almost impossible to teach them when they have something else on their mind.
Yeah, you
It's
have
a
to
waste of
hold
time.
space in some way for them to just let it out.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes they tell you things that they don't even tell their parents, which is very you get taken aback by it slightly, but it just shows that they trust you, and that I think that lends itself to better playing, don't you think? When the student trusts you in the
For sure.
lesson.
For sure. And you're a human who makes music. So you can't have a lesson that isn't human in
Exactly.
some way or not.
Exactly. It's not like maths where it's just logical expression. It's very human expression. So you studied at Western University, the music degree there. Was there a particular emphasis on teacher training, so preparing students for a life of pedagogy outside?
Western has a few streams. So we had an education stream. So if you wanted to go into the public school education, there was that. So we already had teachers who were familiar with how to teach in pedagogy. I was in the performance stream. So for me, there were specific courses that was mandatory to take
Mm-hmm.
for piano pedagogy. And I was really lucky to, at that time, have a very great pedagogue as a professor. In the master's, there isn't as much of a focus on teaching, but there are still really good professors there that if you wanted to get in connection with them, you can.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy those times when you were in those teaching modules?
Um, in the teaching modules, I did enjoy my time, and I think I have to lend it to the pedagogue for sure. And how she really made the course practical, allowed us to discuss, and we were able to like have live teaching sessions, like a master class, and then we could critique each other. So I think the way that she had handled the courses made it very relevant, practical, and enjoyable.
Mm. Were you teaching your classmates in these master classes, these teaching master classes?
Sometimes,
Right.
sometimes if we need to like test out certain skills or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but she would actually bring in her own younger students.
Oh, brilliant. That's really good.
Yeah, and then it would be like a live teaching master class, and you'd hold a lesson, and we just watch how different people teach, how they work, how they think, how they work with their students. So that was very, very
Mm.
nice.
That's one of my not complaints, but things to improve on when I was doing my teaching class module as well, which is exactly the perfect thing was what your teacher did to bring her own young students to simulate an actual young person music lesson, because we were teaching our classmates, we were the same age, and then the lecturer told us to, whoever was being taught, we had to act like a 6-year-old in front of the class. And we had to pretend what a 6-year-old knows and what they don't know. We had to play like a 6-year-old. Can you imagine conservatoire students trying to play like a 6-year-old?
It's difficult to play bad when you know
It's
how to
very
play well.
difficult. It's very difficult. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's and it's not realistic. It's not realistic. And I've always held this opinion that, there are some 6-year-olds who are very good at the piano, very talented, very musical, and you can't. There is a sort of general lesson plan you can do, but I think you can teach the generality of it, but to get into specifics might not be applicable to that 6-year-old, because they might be incredibly talented. They might be a prodigy. So you have to,
Yes.
you got to be flexible. But I love what your lecturer did to bring in an actual 6-year-old and to have the lesson from there. Did you feel like that was really beneficial to see that happen in real life at that age?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because every student is different, their material is different, and the person that they're working with, the teacher, is different. So you get
Yes.
to see that, like, organism trying to work together,
Mm-hmm.
figure things out. And it's also nice to see, like, oh, this person has this personality, this methodology, this student's like
Yes.
this. How did it mix? What worked? What
Hmm.
didn't? If I have a student like that, should I adopt that type of a role that help them work that way, or maybe I shouldn't? So it just
Yes.
made everything very eye-opening. And you
Hmm.
learned a lot, even if it was just like a short session.
Was it always the same student, or was it a different student every time that she brought in?
It was two sessions. One was for the younger ones, so we're thinking like 5 to 7 on the lower grade, beginner grades. All of them different students, all of them different student teachers. Then the
Right.
next session was intermediate, more advanced, all different students, and then same teachers but with a different student.
I see. I see. That's such a better way to do it than what I did.
Yeah, she was really good at setting up that course, and so thankful for her.
Yeah. Did you have your own private students whilst you were studying at
I
Western
had a
University?
few, yes.
I see. And did you teach them at your student accommodation, or did you go inside your university to teach those students?
Oh, we all snuck into the practice rooms to
Yeah.
teach. Yeah.
Yeah, people did that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a free Steinway, teach on a free Steinway.
Yeah, why not? Make
Why
that part of
not?
your business marketing plan.
Exactly. um, during your time at Western University, and I'm assuming you saw a lot of different professors teach as well. You saw a lot of. Did you have many visiting artists give performances and masterclasses at the university? You did.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So if you reflect on all those times, um, who influenced your teaching style the most? Your current teaching style the most? Who did you see that you liked their style and you really liked how their aura and how they handled situations and their way of explaining musical concepts? Was there a particular person or any particular ideas that struck you?
Funnily enough, the teachers that have influenced me the most were actually not during my university period. They were during my high school period because I think I was very lucky to have two important figures in my musical world, and also after to have met another professor, teacher that I still study with here and there when I have time. Um, so I would say for both of those, the ones in high school, they taught me about connecting with the student. Like, first and foremost, before the music happens, before anything happens, you have to connect with the student in some way, shape, or form, and have that sense of trust and bond in a way. And you might not be able to connect with every student. That's fine. And then the other teacher that I currently study with is they taught me how to listen and how to communicate between what goes on in here, what goes on with the ears, and what goes on with like the body to actually make everything happen. So those two were the biggest influence on the way I teach.
So when you say listen, do you mean listen to yourself play or practice?
Listen on all levels. So there's the first listening, like, can you hear the sound that you make as it comes out of your instrument?
Sure.
Yeah. There's the listen of, like, are you actually listening to what you hear and want in your head, so your inner ear? Because oftentimes, like, if you aren't able to do the both, you're either listening to what's in here and you're ignoring what is actually coming out of your instrument. You get too enamored what's happening in your head. Or sometimes you're too focused on the sound, you lose track of what you want to actually have.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's the listening of, like, your body. Is my body feeling okay today? Like, am I sore somewhere? Am I holding tension? Is my body telling me, like, okay, you've been on this, like, practice session for too long, I need a break, go get food? There's also that.
Sure.
And then there's also the listening of, like, your own mental environment. Are you telling yourself things that help build you up, or are you knocking yourself down?
Right.
And all of that stuff can happen, like, all in one go. Like, you play a passage and it can all hit you at once. And sometimes it's overwhelming, and then you don't know what's going on. You're like, I don't know what happened. I know I made a mistake, but I don't know what's going on. So you do it again. But it's a matter of, like, really listening to whatever info you're coming in and, like, sifting and organizing it.
Right. And that skill, holding that skill, is what separates a good student from a great student, would you say? The act of critical listening.
And a good artist from a great artist. Not saying that I'm a great artist in any way, but I think that's a really important skill to have.
Is that how do we practice that? Do we just it's just a numbers game? We just got to do it a lot of times and try to practice that.
I think you need the experience for sure.
The experience, yeah.
I think you need someone to point it out to you, because you can't work on something you're not even aware of. You don't even know is a thing that you could listen to. It's like, I can listen to my body, I can listen to my thoughts, and that actually affects how my sound comes out, you know? So I think another thing is, don't try to tackle it all at once, because you're not going to be able to do that. But maybe spend 5 minutes where you're just actually listening to the sound of your instrument. You can forget about the other stuff. Spend 5 minutes actually listening, like, what is it that I want? Spend some time checking in on your body, checking in on your mental state. And over time, those things will start to find their own balance within your system.
Yes, yes. I always hear stories of musicians bringing a friend along. I'm going to focus on pianists because we're both pianists. I've heard a lot of stories of my pianist friends saying that they bring someone with them to a rehearsal, to a piano side rehearsal, and they ask them to sit at the back of the hall or in the middle of the hall, whichever you prefer, and they play and they'll check the balance and the sound, because sometimes, going back to your listening point, sure, you can listen to what sound comes out of the piano, but what you hear here at the piano will not be what someone hears at the very back. And that's kind of reassuring but also terrifying at the same time. Because
Yes, absolutely.
as a pianist, knowing that there's these two different versions of what you play, depending on where the person is sitting. I mean, how do you we're left with this monumental task of trying to find out what it is we're trying to go for, what sound we're going for. What's your thoughts on this?
I agree with you. It is terrifying because you work so hard at the space between you and your instrument. And you're like, this sounds great.
Yeah.
I love this. You go record it and you're like, it's not the same.
It's not
What
the
is
same.
what is this? It's not the same at all. So yeah, I think one, have that friend whose ears you trust.
Yes.
Just ask anybody because they don't know what they're listening for. And when I go into a hall and stuff, I do check around for the acoustics. I do notice that I have a weird ear for like acoustics.
Oh, really?
And I've always played with them. Yeah, so I know like what's kind of going around. And then I asked them to obviously go around and get that feedback. But I think the most important thing is just get a recording device, set it up somewhere, play through whatever it is that you think, and then compare. And then you learn, oh, when I have this sound at the piano this close, it sounds like this over there. Noted. And I remember one of my teachers telling me that when we are listening, there's like 3 different concert halls that we always have to be attended to. And one of them is you and the instrument is one concert hall. Then you've got like the instrument and like the space. That's another concert hall that you need to be aware of. And the last one is the most important, where it's you, the instrument, and like the audience. Because when the theater is also packed with bodies, it absorbs sound too, and that's different as well.
Exactly. So we're bombarded with so many different concert halls. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. But yeah, moving on slightly. I'm going back to your having good professors and them influencing you. Another influence I've had is sort of not seeing my own professors, but seeing famous musicians practice themselves. The example I can think of is Kissin. I'm not sure if you've seen any Yevgeny Kissin's documentaries on YouTube.
No, I've seen his documentaries, but a few of them. But
I see. There was a film made by Christopher Nupin, who's a British South African filmmaker, and he was filming Kissin preparing for recital at the Royal Albert Hall, and he was just drilling Liszt La Campanella, just the right hand, and there was such dedication and such attention to the way he practiced, and it really influenced the way I wanted to practice too. This attentiveness to drilling. And I just want to quickly ask this first question: have you seen any of your professors practice before, or did they even
No, and I wish I did.
You wish you did.
Yeah, I think as like the thing that my previous teacher instilled on me, which was like focus on the process. I think, you know, listening to the greats play their instrument and analyzing their technique and all this stuff, important, great lesson tool. But just seeing how their brain works and processes, and how they work and fiddle things out, it is so much more valuable.
And I wish there was more of that.
Yeah.
I wish there was more of that.
And so I'm so like happy when Tiffany Poon decided to like do a little bit of her live streaming her practice and stuff. And I'm like, thank you, because there's little nuggets of gold in there for sure.
Yes, yeah. That's so true. You always see the final product. You don't see how the process, what the process was like. I want to see the struggle. I want to see famous musicians struggle with the passage and then them figuring out.
Yeah, and just like know how they're thinking to do that so you can apply it to your own stuff or whatever.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That'd be such a good TV show. Famous musicians
Let's do
tackling
it
problems.
together.
Let's
Let's
produce
do that.
this. Let's produce
Yes,
this.
I'm on it.
um, has anyone watched you practice? I know you film yourself practice, but um, did you always feel comfortable having a camera on you or having someone watch you practice? What was your experience like with
I've
that?
live streamed a bit of my practices. I've always wanted to because I recognize the importance of like watching someone practice and the information you can learn from that. Not saying that like I have nuggets of wisdom and all these wonderful things, but I'm sure that I'm doing something that might help someone else. It's the educator
Yes.
part of me, like speaking. So I've done some live streams. I'm still getting used to recording my practice sessions for the 100-day challenge
Mhm.
because the moment that record button hits, the performers in me like, it's time to get this right. It's time to
Yep.
show what I've got to do, and which is a completely different mindset when you're practicing. And so I'm still like trying to navigate that thing that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sort of becomes a performance, a very subtle performance when the camera turns on. Even though you're practicing, there's this subconscious thing that you got to play a little bit better, make less mistakes, make
Or just
some, but
practice better, whatever that means.
exactly, exactly, yeah. Um, w- what's the first thing you do when you um, encounter a new piece? Say, let's talk. Let's say the Rachmaninoff prelude that you're doing now. What was the first thing? Day one. What was the first thing you do when you practice?
um, I learn it away from my instrument as much as I can.
Oh,
So I take the music and if I don't know the piece that well, then I'll go and see how other people are playing, see what their interpretation is like. If I have an understanding of what I want from it, then I leave that for later because I don't want them to influence too much of what I'm doing. And then I'll score study, I'll prep my scores, which is like writing and fingerings, key chordal progressions, things that's going to help with the memory. Um, I'm like a visual learner in a way. So if
hmm.
you've ever seen my scores, it's a work of Picasso like art. It's a mess everywhere. So everything's colored in for key sections. It helps with my memory. And then I decide on my interpretations roughly. I don't like to go into learning a piece where like this is the interpretation, although having a clear picture of your interpretation is valuable. But as you learn and you practice things and you actually experience in your fingers, things will change.
Hmm.
So I like to just have a general framework. And I just analyze the music and see, okay, this section's going to need more time than this one. This one's
Hmm.
got a tricky voicing thing. I should probably get on that. This section's the same. Good. I don't have to practice it again. I'll fit it in a little bit later. So just studying the score and if there's really tricky parts, then I try to mental practice that a little bit first, so that
Hmm.
if the brain knows it, it's just a lot easier to teach the fingers than as opposed to having like the fingers stumble through everything and then you're trying to work out that mess. Go in with a
Yes.
clear brain.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So I do the same, but let's articulate it for the listeners out there. So so from what I've heard, practice itself is a preparation, but you also prepare how to practice.
Yes.
So wow, practiceception. This is a
You should be my translator for my students.
do you ever work backwards? So you learn the last bar first and you work backwards like this.
Yes.
Yeah. For the listeners, why do you think this is a good way to practice?
Many reasons. One, if you start at the beginning is something you play really well, and you're like, oh, I play it really well, I'm going to keep playing it and playing the beginning. First page is fabulous. And then as your performance goes along, it starts to kind of dismantle itself because you didn't work on the ending as
For
hard.
sure, for
You
sure.
can
Yep.
tell. And ideally, if things happen in the middle of the piece, you should have a good opening, a good closing. So you
Yes.
want to you want to work on the ending for sure.
Yep.
But I think it's also a really good practice tool because sometimes if you're not disciplined with yourself, you start at the beginning of a passage and you're like, oh yeah, I'm practicing through here. You pass through what you're supposed to practice and you keep going. And the next thing you know, you're at the end of the piece. By working backwards, you start at, say, bar 37 and you go to the end. There's nothing else for you to play. So you start back at 37 again. You go at the end, and it helps you sectionalize music. And then there's different ways to practice backwards, but you could take, let's say, last 3 bars, do that, then go 3 bars back or a phrase back. So even if you want to indulge yourself by playing a little bit more than your practice section, you're still getting that extra section into your fingers. You're still practicing without actually knowing it. And it also is a really good way to like organize your music for memory, because now as every section you're working backwards, you've got a little memory station that you know really well, as opposed to like this infinite feed of like musical bars.
Yes. I do agree. Yeah, a good opening, and then a very, let's say, demotivated and not much energy in the ending. You know that person practiced the beginning more than the end, for sure, absolutely. And I think it's a very good technique to start backwards, as you said, for memory. And also when the ending is strong, it sort of ties everything up, and you know that there's an ending that you can finish, and then all you have to do is just work backwards, rather than start from the beginning and work your way through in a very chronological order. I think it tricks the brain slightly, and it makes it seem more manageable.
Yeah,
and you enjoy.
No, go ahead. You can finish.
No, I was gonna say you enjoy your sessions a lot more because you nailed the intro and you nailed the ending, and all that's left is the stuff in between that's left. Yes. It just subtly tricks the brain to thinking that, okay, I feel like I've contained the piece. Now I'm just going to fill it out. Fill in the middle sections. It's a nice feeling. Yeah. It's a nice feeling.
It is.
And what you're saying, you're about to say something.
Yes. I think it's also very helpful for people who have like a stage fright, if they have performance anxiety, because the hardest thing is starting the piece and ending it. Doesn't matter what happens in the middle, so at least you're like, I got the first page. If anything happens, it's okay because I got the last page.
Exactly.
Even if that means if I have to skip a bunch of pages in the middle. If the person doesn't know the music, they'll be like, oh, it sounded really good, and that was the ending was really good too. Must have been really good. It's good.
Yeah, exactly. You at the beginning you were saying that you learn the piece away from the piano and you visualize it. If you could help us by articulating, what do you visualize away from your piano, your process of seeing it in your head, what do you see and what do you do?
When you're visualizing or like doing mental practice, you want to make the session as real as possible. That means you want to imagine the sound that you make. How does it feel? What does it look like? What is your room like? So you might imagine yourself actually walking up to your piano, seeing your keys, and you're basically practicing in your head. You're seeing your hands move on the keys. What notes are you playing? What does it sound like? What is my arm doing? And so you're recreating that whole thing in your head. And so it becomes like a mental gymnastics in a way. But if you can recreate everything in your head, then you definitely know the music.
Yes. Yeah. And it's harder than you think.
It took me a while, and I'm still working on it.
Yeah. It takes a lot of brain CPU. It's like it drains a lot of energy. Yeah. I remember my harmony teacher at conservatoire, she was saying that if she can't play through the piece in her head, knowing where every finger goes, where the pedal goes down, then she knows she's not ready. And I tried doing that once with the Beethoven concerto that I played about 4 years ago.
You started with the Beethoven concerto? Oh man.
Yeah, number one. Yeah. Thank you, James, for pushing me. Yeah, I can't remember who chose it. I think it was my teacher. Yeah, it was the third movement is a pain in the ass. But
I played that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's so nimbly. But I tried to do that with the Beethoven. I couldn't make it past the first movement during the early days of trying to visualize. I just couldn't do it. It just took too much too much focus. And I thought, if you could do that for the whole piece, for a whole concerto, you've got a superpower brain. That's just
Yeah,
that's
for
some
sure.
brain you got there. Is
Hmm.
that something you do as well for the longer pieces, or is it something you do for the shorter
I
pieces?
still try. I think those who are capable of like visualizing an entire concerto or entire piece, they have locked up those experience points since they were young kids,
Right.
and they were imagining themselves playing, and they were in once you're a kid, you just learn better. You know, just learn quicker. Your imagination is a little bit sharper, and you're also in this place where if you're imagining things in your brain, you're it's actually a sense of play for them. So they're not actually focusing on like, oh, I need to feel how my arms feel. I need to think about the analytics of the chord passages. I need to think of all these things. They're just like, I'm just playing in my brain. Whereas an
Mm.
adult coming to visualization, we're not playing in our brain. We're like, I need to get this mental visualization in. It's going to
Mm.
help me. I'm going to think about all these things and we get overloaded. So I would say take it in small little bits. Practice
Yes.
just like a bar or a passage. But I'm still working on trying to like visualize an entire piece. I'm on like sections right now because just like you, it's a lot of CPU. And when I first started visualization, like it put me to sleep. And I have insomnia. So sometimes I would practice in my head just to put myself to sleep. So that was another barrier I had to get over.
Musician's version of counting sheep. Yeah.
Yes.
But just visualize some Rachmaninoff or some Beethoven.
Exactly.
Put you to sleep. I think doctors should prescribe that to insomniacs. Pianists who can't sleep. So yeah, practice is a form of problem solving. Are there signs that we didn't practice well?
Yeah, tons of
Po-
signs.
Can you name a few?
If you went in with a goal and you didn't accomplish that goal, you didn't practice. But that's also two sides of a coin. One, maybe you haven't figured out the solution to your problem. That's fine. Come back to it another day. But if you did not even engage in that feedback loop and that problem solving, then you did not probably have a good. You didn't get your goals done. Part of
Hmm.
the practice session is problem solving, even if it's a little bit. And I think another sign is if you left the practice room feeling crummy, you didn't have a good practice session. Something was going on there that you gotta look into.
Right.
But
Right.
to get a bit more practical, if you feel tension in your body, that's a sign for sure. Whether it's
Oh,
the way
that.
you approach something. Yeah. But also note, is it mental tension or is it a physical tension?
Hmm.
Sometimes mental tension can make physical tension because your body and mind is connected. So if
Hmm.
you're really stressing out about a passage because you feel overloaded and therefore your body's like, I'm overloaded, I'm going to tense up, then you need to unpack what's going on in here, take smaller little bits.
Hmm.
But that's a sign if you're not having a good practice session. Um, if you're not listening to yourself when you practice,
When you
and
practice.
yeah,
Yeah.
listening to what is actually coming out,
Hmm.
and if you're not forming that feedback loop, so
Hmm.
ultimately that's what it is.
Hmm. Yeah. Um. Because sometimes you're not gonna solve every problem that you have every session. Like you said, there's going to be times where you do solve some problems, but also times where you're tackling a problem, but you haven't found a solution yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the important thing is not whether not whether you solved it, but whether you've engaged in it, meant like intellectually and physically too. That's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
So no mindless practice. I think that's a waste of time, a huge waste of time. And when you do mindless, just another point, when you do mindless practice, you're not paying attention to what you're doing, and you let bad habits slide past you, and you start doing things that you don't particularly want further down the line. So if you're always using a fourth finger where a third finger is better, and then you have to waste more time down the line to sort of undo that. I mean, if you do that from the beginning, you save yourself a few hours of rewiring your brain and rewiring your muscles. So
For sure.
mindless practice wastes a lot of time in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Many ways. Just another question about listening. If let's say the piano was muted, the hammers were muted, so when you play the key, nothing came out. If you were to play a chord, just from the way your muscles were interacting with the keys and your fingers and your back and your shoulders, would you be able to tell, personally, would you be able to tell if you made a good sound? Because you know your body well, but I just want to ask you that question. Would you
Yeah,
be
I
able to tell?
definitely can.
You can.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah. Is it?
is is it just experience of listening to yourself and listening to your
Yeah, I
muscles
think
and
it
how they
is.
act?
I think for me, I was injured at one point in my studies. So I went on this like deep dive of like how do I use my body? How do I get this mind and stuff all connected? So I somehow with the way that I was trying to solve all my problems, I ended up connecting like the brain, the inner ear, the outer ear, and the body really deeply. So I know that if I go into a passage and I like, I don't know, hike up my shoulder a little bit, I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna get a funny sound, and I'll stop myself.
Mm,
But
mm.
it involved a lot of very deep, intense, slow practice.
Yeah.
And also a lot of experimentation. Like, oh, if I do this with my elbow and I play, what sound do I get? If I
Yes.
don't, what sound do I get? And it's just racking up a lot of experience and getting to know yourself, your instrument, and your body as an instrument.
Mm, that's so true. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I think I can tell too.
Thank you.
Um, especially when there's a time when I play when my forearms would feel very loose and feel very warm, and that translates well to the sound I make on the piano. And then I always long for this sensation whenever I play. I always long for it because it just feels so free, relaxing. There's no tension. You can do things that you can't normally do on a cold day when your arms are not in that situation. And yeah, I've been always trying to really hone in on the process. How did that warm sensation come about? And sometimes it's as simple as wearing a coat. Sometimes a really thick coat um, and doing some physical activity whilst wearing a coat.
Mm-hmm.
It's very specific, but so that's something I do before before a concert. I try to wear a coat, and I'll try to lift some heavy boxes whilst I have that coat on. And then when I finished, I put it down, take the coat off, and I play the piano. It's so freeing,
Yeah, you
and
get the blood, everything all lubricated. It's great.
everything yeah, it's just like a well-oiled machine suddenly.
Yeah.
Um, so I think those are better than scales. just
Yeah.
lifting boxes. Yeah.
Definitely getting that blood going. I'm so glad that that's like your pre-performance routine. And it's like
lifting
just wearing a
boxes.
coat, getting the blood going. Like everyone needs a pre-performance routine, and it seems to be something that makes you feel like more confident with your playing and more secure. It's a
Exactly.
good thing. Keep
Yeah.
it.
I think I will. I'll bring some weights to my next concert. um, I don't know about you, but it's something I've experiencing. Has your experience in piano practicing, sorry, influenced the way you practice other things in life that are not music related?
100%. They
Yeah,
bleed into each other.
really.
And the things that are more foreign to me obviously will influence my piano
Yeah,
practice.
yeah,
But yeah, I think at the end of the day, regardless of whether you're doing like karate or piano or flute or you're cooking, you're all engaging in the same practice system.
mm,
You're always needing some type of a feedback loop. Like, I'm playing something, I'm evaluating it. What do I need to do? You problem solve, you repeat. It's always
yes,
that. And then it's a matter of like distilling it for certain situations and whatnot, and keeping a
yes,
clear brain and blah, 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 blah. But I remember when I was doing gymnastics, because I wanted like another hobby, something that I wanted to do. And sports and music are highly related in the mental process and the physical process, everything. And I remember, and not to sound like, oh, I'm like better than everybody and arrogant, but I did have a leg up in learning new skills because I practiced practicing
Hmm.
nearly every day. And just the thought process of going through all of it and knowing that I can talk to myself like mentally, not putting myself down. I got good inner self-talk, no bad critics, things like that. And there was a definite like difference. And by like, I'm not a gymnast by any means. Like, I'm an adult, you know, like I'm not flexible or anything. And I am clumsy as hell. And I could see that there was a difference.
Mm.
So all the people out there, go learn an instrument. It'll help you in life.
Yes, exactly. Or maybe the other way around. Some sportswomen or sports people can take those valuable practice lessons and bring it to the piano.
Hmm.
That
You
might be
know,
possible.
programmers are very good at playing piano.
Really?
Yeah, at least from my experience and the students that I've taught,
Right.
because they have to think very systematically, like A does B, this happens. I have to debug, you know, all that stuff. And so when they go into the practice room, they think in that way. It's very systematic.
Mm. You know what? This is a thought that came to me the other day. I'm glad you mentioned programmers. Don't you think? Let's see what you think. A sheet of music is like a page of program,
It is.
and we're the
It's a
computers.
recipe.
Yeah,
Yes, we are.
we're the meat computers, and
Well, when you put it that way, I don't know if I would agree with that.
so that's a weird way of putting it, but still, you get what I mean. So run with me with the analogy.
I will run with you. I'll run with you.
So the manuscript is for the meat computers, and it has all these instructions, tells us what to do from A to B, and has a function to play this music. Yeah, I just think a sheet of music is like a page of code for humans.
It is. I
Yeah.
remember like an artist came in and gave a master class, and they had said that like the music is really just a recipe. It's just a sheet of instructions and you can follow them. But your sheet of instructions, as exact as they may be, is still a little bit open to interpretation. It only can
Mm,
express so much. And so you have to find those little, the read in between the lines and
yes.
see how you can make it your own instructions. Fill out the
Yes.
body of it.
Yes. Exactly. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that transitions to very smoothly to the final question of today's episode. I wish we could talk longer, but we have a limited number of time. So Alfred Brendal wrote an essay. I bring this to every musician because I'm so interested to find the answer. He said that in an essay on recitals and programs, that old music such as Bach, Beethoven, Haydn, etc., should not be treated as titans in a museum, to be preserved, to be looked at only, but instead should be brought back to life. This is quote unquote brought back to life and relating to our own times. Now, I really like what you said before that it's quite a detailed instruction of what to do in some cases, and there's a very narrow framework on what to do, and that leaves a very big problem for us when we're trying to forge our own identities in music. Because let's say if we played a Mozart concerto, it's been played hundreds of times. How do we relate that to our own times, and how do we find ourselves in that? I just want to know your opinion on this.
I definitely agree with you with classical music and this faithfulness to the score, this weird obsession with the faithfulness to the score. And we also, luckily and unluckily, have all these recordings from the greats. We get trapped in like, this is the way that you're going to play this Beethoven sonata. It is the ultimate way. No one can play it better, and then we're just going to idolize it, put it on a pedestal. And like you said, like put it in like a museum and just have it as a titan of a masterpiece. And it's very difficult as an artist to be like, well, how can I break free from that, be myself, but still make another titan in the museum in a way?
Yes.
It is really, really hard. And I think trying to like, as I guess Brendal was saying, he wanted to, how can you like recontextualize the music into the
Yeah.
modern society? it made me think of like two things.
Mhm.
One is, what can we actually do to the music, like literally just remanipulate it into something that is a bit more modern. For example,
Mhm.
like part of the way that I've been brought up is going to hate saying this, but let's say we take something by Beethoven and we put like some trap beat behind it. We have recontextualized it for the modern world.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a more accessible. How can we make classical music more accessible to our modern world for people who don't know how to access this music?
Hmm.
Putting a trap beat behind it is one way to like be like, oh, that was a cool melody. What was that? Oh, who's Beethoven? Oh, this sonata. You hear the original version, it's like it speaks to me, and then you get into this deep dive. I mean, like that can happen.
Yeah.
And a part of me, as like the classical musician, is like, you would never ever put a trap beat to Beethoven. How could you? And that's the whole thing about like you have to be faithful to the score, to the composer's intentions, to the traditions. But who's to say that Beethoven might not, might have really enjoyed the trap beat to his music? If he was a composer in this day and time, he'd be like, yeah, electronic music is my jam. He might be. You don't know. We don't know what his intentions are. So why not be open and be creative in changing the music a little bit to an audience in modern day would enjoy, as maybe a gateway to the idea of traditionalism and conservatism if they wanted to go down that route.
Mhm.
And then it got me thinking of another thing, which was the way for traditions to exist and continue to exist through the modern times is that it has to evolve. Which is weird because like traditions, like you think, oh my god, everything stays the same, it's going to be like this. But in order for it to stay alive, in order for classical music, I guess, to stay alive, is that it has to evolve with the times. And that can also do with the way people approach classical music, the way their outlook, their mindset with it. People sometimes go into classical music and they're like, oh, it's so stuffy, it's so boring, it's real traditional, blah, blah, blah. But then you're not saying that the music is boring, because the music is not. It absolutely isn't. And it's talking about emotions that are timeless, but we'd have to change the way people think about classical music. That it's not some stuffy old thing, that it can be interesting. And so we can do that by perhaps taking a Beethoven sonata and relating it to the times that are happening now. If you're a movie artist or you're making films, maybe you want to take a classical piece that is really sad for whatever reason and put it into one of your films. And then if someone falls in love with the film, they're like, oh, I love that background music. Oh, wow, it was Chopin or something. And so just trying to find ways for people to connect their own modern experience with the timeless emotions that classical music does have to offer, if that makes sense. Try to be
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
concise as I can.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope we
Thank you
speak
for
again soon.
having me.
No,
I
absolutely my
think I
pleasure.
hope we can as well.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.